Hey y'all, it's Jennifer. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am coming to you with a video that may come as a shock to some of y'all. This is a video that is going to be all about different translations of War and Peace. And those of you who have been around on my channel for a long time, you probably know I pretty famously DNF'd War and Peace back in 2021. And I have always felt like in the back of my mind, Tolstoy's just not the author for me. And 2021 was really like my classics year. I was just really enjoying classics in 2021. And I haven't had as good a classics year since or even before that. And so I kind of have always felt like if I couldn't tackle it in 2021, I don't know that I'll ever be able to do it. But I have also DNF'd War and Peace one time previously, back in 2016 when the BBC miniseries came out, which I watched. But something has just possessed me. Call it ambition, call it the impending Joaquin Phoenix Napoleon movie, but I just can't believe I let War and Peace defeat me. I am going to commit to this, I'm going to finish it, and I'm going to give it my all. I'm really going to go in with a positive outlook and an open mind. Everyone will tell you War and Peace is very readable. Tolstoy in general, I would say, is very readable. I thoroughly enjoyed Anna Karenina, so I have always been curious about why I didn't vibe with War and Peace. And I think a lot of that comes down to translation. So that's what I wanted today's video to be all about, is just different translations of War and Peace so that you can make a decision about where you want to start. I have had the opportunity to dip in and out of the 4 big translations of War and Peace. I think there are 4 big names when you're looking up translators of War and Peace, though there have certainly been more translations than just those 4. I think there are 4 big names out there. And to me, I have always said this, translation is just something that really fascinates me, and I truly do think it can make or break your experience with a book. In the case of modern books, we basically have only one translation. And so that's a shame. You never know if the translation that got published is really the best one or really the best that it could be. But in the case of something like a classic, you often have many different options. And for War and Peace, there are 4 bigs. So you have Constance Garnett, who is the oldest translator. You have Maude, which I think would be the next oldest. Then you have Anthony Briggs and Pevear and Volokhonsky, who are a little bit more modern. Constance Garnett is somebody that I do want to just take a moment to defend. I think she gets a bad rap in terms of translation. A lot of people really, really dislike her translations. I personally have really enjoyed her in the past, but the War and Peace edition that I DNF'd in 2016 was translated by her. And I don't want to say it's all down specifically to her translation because I was in grad school at the time. I was starting grad school. So I just don't think I had the brain space to really read something like War and Peace at the time with a bunch of different characters in it. To say something positive for her, she really did know Tolstoy and she translated a bunch of Russian works. And that is the thing I'll say about her that maybe is a big critique and something to keep in mind. I have had the opportunity to read her translations of many different Russian classics, not just War and Peace. And I do think, even though I really enjoyed her style because she kind of has a classical way of writing, she's really lyrical, she kind of keeps that beautiful prose intact. I do think, even though I have read her for multiple different authors, she sounds the same with each of them. I really do think sometimes you're reading Constance Garnett and you're not reading Dostoevsky or Tolstoy. I personally am a massive fan of her translations of Dostoevsky. I think they're really great, but others say that she's really not good at Dostoevsky, but she's really good at Tolstoy. So that is just something that you have to take into account. I'll never know how well she did or didn't do because I'll never read this in the original, but she is one of the first translators. And then you have the Maude translation. Now, the Maude translation is what Oxford uses, and this is the edition that I attempted to read in 2021. And you can see how far I got. I was really annotating this. I made it 500 pages in. Now, looking back on the experience that I had in 2021, I really struggled with this. I think a lot of it is that I was trying to read it over a long period of time. I tried to take this slowly. But at the same time, I have always thought, when I have thought back on this, that I just truly did not enjoy this translation. What's unfortunate about that is that Maude is actually the translation that Tolstoy gave his okay to. But what I want to say about the Oxford edition specifically is that that is actually a revised edition of their translation. When I was really looking at this the other day, I saw a couple of other names in the Maudes, and I thought to myself, I thought this was the Maude translation. It is, but it has been newly revised. And I think actually of the big four translations, this has had the most modern revision, so it's technically the newest translation, weirdly enough. There are large passages that are in French in War and Peace, and Maude will have the French on the text and then translate it in a footnote. That will either really annoy you or that will really be the best part of it to you. To me, what I think I would have rather had was the translation be in the text with the French at the bottom in the footnote. But other translators don't even include the fact that anything was written in French, which I think is a shame and is kind of disingenuous to the book. A good thing I will say about this translation is that it's very approachable. I think every translation I have tried has really made this very approachable. If you're thinking about reading War and Peace, I think the key thing to keep in mind is that you can't go into it thinking this is the best novel ever written. I don't think it's helpful to you to go in with those expectations of grandeur, because I kind of think that sets you up for failure. That's what happened with me in 2021, because I wound up being disappointed by the prose level of this. And so I wondered if I just got a bad translation, but part of me also just wonders if Tolstoy wasn't really that lyrical a writer. He seems very straight up. So this could be a very great option for you. It was very readable. It really was approachable. And to me, in many ways, this translation was easier to read than the Constance Garnett. And when I'm comparing it to contemporary novels of its time that were written in English, just trying to think of things like David Copperfield, maybe, I actually think War and Peace in translation is an easier read than something like David Copperfield. The thing that's really intense about War and Peace is the level of characters and the war scenes. And the war scenes, to me, are so much more interesting than the scenes of peace. And to me, the Maude translation really showed off in those war scenes. I think those scenes felt more lyrical, they felt more intense. And so this was not really a bad translation, but I have always figured that part of the reason I DNF'd this was that I just wasn't engaged with this translation. Other than the Maudes, we have the Anthony Briggs translation, which is fairly modern. It's come out in the 2000s. And this is one that I have done a lot of research on over the past couple of weeks when I decided I wanted to take the plunge. And I was really going to do this. I'm going to read War and Peace. Anthony Briggs is now who is in the Penguin Classics version of War and Peace. And I do not care for his translation. I compared the first chapter of all four of these side by side on Google Books just to get a good taste for the translation. I think that's great advice. I think you should do that anytime you're reading a work that's been translated that has multiple different translations. Read the same few pages in each translation, and then you'll find which one you like. This is the one that automatically turned me off, that I had just zero interest in. Anthony Briggs does a lot to update the language, which I think is really beneficial to someone who is new to classics or who specifically really wants to get War and Peace off their bucket list. I think for a lot of us, War and Peace is one of the big ones on the bookish bucket list. And I think modernizing the language makes it far more approachable and makes it a quicker read. But for me, I don't read classics necessarily because I want them to be easy. I really am reading classics for the beautiful language 9 times out of 10. And so that's why I thought an older translation would appeal to me. And that is why the Anthony Briggs translation does not appeal to me at all. Now, people are different readers. I am often reading for the prose style. I'm often just reading a book for the beautiful writing. That's the reason why I have ever come back to classics. That's the reason why I've ever read classics, is that I think they're a little bit more beautifully written than some more modern books. For people who don't care about prose style at all, or for people who just in general prefer something to be a little bit more direct, I do think the Briggs will work well for you. It just automatically turned me off. That is something that I don't like about modern translations. I see it done a lot and I can understand the reason for it, but literally in the Anthony Briggs translation, soldiers are calling each other mate. What also stood out to me in that first couple of chapters was just the amount of slang that was thrown in, modern slang thrown in. That just isn't for me personally, but I think it could really work for a lot of different readers. I feel like I'm going to be the odd man out there. That is a really, really popular translation, and clearly it's popular enough that Penguin would choose it. So that's the one that I would say I didn't initially like. And it's also the one that I had the least experience with. I didn't get very far in that one. Now let's talk about the Big Daddy, Pevear and Volokhonsky. This is clearly the one that I decided that I'm going to go with. And I felt controversially about this because there are so many people who love or hate their translations in general. I think they're really fascinating. Back when I was reading War and Peace in 2021, I watched several videos with them where they talked about the translation process, and I think that was really, really interesting. They try to go for apparently a very literal translation. Now, of course, Tolstoy cannot be translated literally, but they do what they can. They try to preserve a lot of the tics of his writing. For example, Tolstoy liked to repeat the same word multiple times on the same page for kind of dramatic effect. Well, they try to keep that. And for my money, I'll say, I think the Maudes also tried to keep that. I have just never tried the P&B translation of any Russian classic. So this was really exciting to me. I just felt like it was the time to try them. But there are a lot of naysayers in the Russian translation world. There are a lot of people who genuinely do not like their translations. And again, because I haven't read any of their translations before to compare them, I'm not really sure how I'm going to fall on this. I have never read, for example, one of their translations of Dostoevsky. I have read, I think, one of their translations of Pushkin, and I really thoroughly enjoyed it. Really, the reason I went with this is so aesthetic. It was basically an aesthetic choice, and a lot of it came down to, in my opinion, the readability of the book. I wanted a physical copy of War and Peace because I want to annotate it. And I had already started annotating the Maude. When I started reading it again the other day, I just wasn't vibing the translation. So I decided to indulge and get this one. To me, this is just in general a readable physical copy. Look at this. And for what it's worth, I think the text is incredibly readable. The book will clearly stay open, which I think is really, really nice. It's very floppy. Floppy is really important to me in a book, and it's just gorgeous. It really, truly is beautiful, and that really did play into why I picked this one. I'm just going to be straight up with you, but I did want to try a different translation this time around. I've always felt like if I read War and Peace, it's probably going to be one time, and so I really want to commit to it. I want to give myself the best chance of success. So this is third time's the charm. I have tried this 2 other times. We're going to do the P&B this time, and I think it's going to be really, really enjoyable. There are other translations of War and Peace out there that I just couldn't find a good edition of. For example, there's the Edmonds translation. I think a lot of people feel really positively towards that one, but I couldn't find a decent edition of that. I do think at one time that was the version chosen by either Oxford or Penguin. I think it was Penguin before they decided to go over to the Briggs. I have just fallen down the rabbit hole over the past week with translations of War and Peace, and so that's kind of why I wanted to make this video. I don't know if this will be helpful to anyone, but it's really been enjoyable to me. I'm kind of a nerd, so I just really enjoy learning about translation, and I think in a case like War and Peace, you really do want to set yourself up for success, like I said. And I think the best way to do that is to do your research and find the translation that's going to work the best for you. I personally feel like I'm going to have a great time with the P&B, and I would love to know down below which version you have read, which version you would recommend, or if you've never read War and Peace, are you interested in tackling it? I am so excited about this. I don't want to get too excited because I was really excited in 2021. Really, the length is not what bothers me here. I think it's going to be the amount of people in it, but I just love the Napoleonic Wars. I love Napoleon. So I'm really excited to get to the good part here. I think the philosophy is going to be interesting. I thoroughly enjoyed the miniseries. And so that's also some kind of early advice I would give you. With classics, I really don't think there's any need to feel guilty about being spoiled for them. You know, I think if it helps you to watch an adaptation of a work before you go into reading it, that's not cheating. That's really helpful. And that's really the reason why I ever wanted to read War and Peace, was that I saw that gorgeous Lily James adaptation of it. And I thought, gosh, this is really approachable. That actually seems like fun to read. From the outside looking in, War and Peace is of course a beast. It's over 1,000 pages long. There's like tons of characters, I think like 30 main characters. And there's a lot of philosophy going on, discussion of big topics like war and peace. But it is, of course, at heart, a love story. It's a war story. There's action, there's romance. There's a lot going for this book, and I think I am really going to enjoy it. I feel very confident this time. So I would really love to know down below your thoughts on translations. How do you feel about Russian translations in general? Do you have a favorite translator of Russian classics? I would love to know all of that down below, but that's going to be all from me today. I hope you're all having a great week. Happy reading. Goodbye.